Hi, Spring fans. Welcome to another installment of Spring Tips. In this installment, we're going to talk about two of my favorite projects, Spring Security and RSocket. Now, RSocket, of course, is a payload agnostic, multiplexed, stateful connection centric, reactive wire protocol that is supported on any number of different platforms and languages, including the JVM through its Java and Reactor based binding. It was developed by Facebook, of course, and people from Netflix as well. And It is a really, really interesting protocol. It's been supported in Spring Framework since Spring Framework 5.2 and Spring Security 5.2. Now, today, we're going to look at the new support for simple authentication in Spring Security 5.3. We've looked at RSocket before. I'm not going to go into too much depth about RSocket itself. There's two videos, not one, but two, count them, that we've looked at before. The first one looked at raw, sort of naked RSocket, just reactor, and I did it in terms of a Spring application, but I could have done it in a public static void main with no Spring at all, right? That was basically what I was demonstrating in that first one. And then the second one looked at the component model in Spring framework itself and the support that was then introduced into Spring Boot. So today we're going to take it a step further. We're going to look at the support in Spring Security 5.3, which is not yet GA, but it's worth looking at. And I'm glad that we waited to do this video because then you wouldn't have to unlearn the slightly different and now deprecated, albeit not backwards incompatible stuff that was there before. So we're going to call this the greetings service. We're going to build a new application using the latest and greatest version of Java. We use RSocket support, security support, hit generate. That gives us a service. Let's also build a client. Okay, generate that. And here we are, UAO, greetings. Oh, did I spell those wrong? Awkward. Let's try that again, this time with some spelling, okay? Okay, that's the greetings client and our service. Here, UAO, greetings service. So let's build the service first. Just a simple username and password based service. It's going to be a greeting service. We're just going to create an endpoint that allows you to stream an infinite stream of greetings back to the client, okay? So, greetings service application. And here, we'll create the greeting service first. Greeting service. And Flux greeting response. So I'm going to create a detail there. And it's going to be a bean private string message at data at allargs constructor at noargs constructor greet string name, and this is just going to be a regular Spring controller, message mapping. And you know what? Let's just go with what works. Greetings controller. And all I'm going to do is, given a name, I'm going to return an infinite stream of values. Okay, so private static, flux of greetings response, greet string name. We're going to say return flux dot from stream dot generate new supplier. Okay, and new greetings response, hello name at instant dot now dot to string, delay the elements there. Okay, almost there. Dot delay elements, duration of seconds. Good stuff. Now we're going to just stream an infinite stream of values. That's it. That's my entire endpoint there. We're going to make this work by having an application that is secured by Spring Security. So we can take advantage of the authenticated principal, which will be installed in the current request. In another video, we also looked at the reactor context. That's the mechanism that's being used to attach things to the current request, for things like distributed tracing and for security and for transaction propagation, that kind of stuff. So that mechanism is being used behind the scenes. Reactive security context holder dot get context dot map sc dot get authentication dot map a dot get name dot flat map and we're just going to greet, right? We're going to say, okay, given a name, return greet name. Alrighty, good stuff. And there we are. All right, there's our entire thing right there. That's the pipeline. Now, we need to actually, I want to revisit this. I don't like having to use this static security context holder. So let's actually configure the security stuff here a little bit here. We're going to create a configuration class at enable RSocket security class RSocket security configuration, and we have two beans that we need to define. One corresponds to authentication, that is to say, who's knocking on the door? Is it Josh? Is it Jane? And then the other is authorization, which corresponds to the question of what can they do once they're inside the system. So we're going to answer these two things in turn. We're going to first answer authentication. And here I'm just going to do what I like to do, which is a sort of a hard-coded list of usernames and passwords, right? So let's actually extract this out. Good. .build var jlong password pw roles user jlong. Okay, rwinch, and rwinch of course is the lead of Spring Security, one of my all-time favorite people, so I trust him with my data and my life implicitly. Jlong rwinch, there we go. All right, so that's authentication. Very trivial. You could have done more. You could have talked to some other identity provider, but for now, I'm happy with that. The next thing that we need to address is authorization. And by the way, this is exactly what you would have done for any other Spring Security application. Obviously, if you're using a non-reactive application, you wouldn't have used the reactive user detail service, but there's something very similar, and you would have used that, right? Now, authorization, however, looks a little different. It's familiar, but it's not the same code as you would have written it elsewhere. So here we create a payload socket acceptor interceptor, and this enters the question of authorization, right? What can they do once they're inside the system? So RSocket security is the builder we're going to use to make this work, and we're going to return security dot authorize payload. So authorize payload spec, and then we want to enable simple. See what I did there? I'm using the old version of Spring Boot and Spring Security. I need to use the latest and greatest. So let me go back here. Good thing we caught that already. Copy that. Okay. I need to change my build. My build needs to use 2.3 milestones, not 2.2x. Okay. So this is the service. Enable auto import. And while I'm at it, I need to just regenerate the client. Might as well. Client. Already. Greetings client. Generate. Alrighty, so now I've got the new stuff. So I don't have just the old HTTP support. I have simple as well. Okay, so customizer with defaults. Now let's configure this. Let's actually configure the authorization. So here I'm going to say authorization spec dot authorization spec dot route. I'm going to mask off greetings. I'm going to say that has to be authenticated, but any exchange otherwise, I'm going to just let it go through, right, to any other exchange. So I'm same as with the HTTP stuff, right? I'm actually I'm doing the most specific stuff first, right? So spec, let's make this a little easier on the eyes. There we go. Spec, I'm saying I want anything that goes to the greetings endpoint in particular to be authenticated, and then if that doesn't match, if that very particular rule doesn't match, fall through to the permit all endpoint, okay, to the permit all rule, so that everything else is now allowed to go through. It's very important that the most specific thing come first. Okay, that's actually it. We've done enough code to make this work. But again, I still have, I don't love this. I love Spring Security, but I wish we could do better. So one thing we can do is install slightly, slightly different support for the programming model. We can install a RSocket message handler. And this message handler lets us contribute. What we're going to do is we're going to contribute a uh, argument resolver to the strategies object that Spring Boot pre-configures for us. So var mh new RSocket message handler mh dot add this new authentication principle. Okay, mh dot strategies. We're going to just inject that. So there's this return mh. All right, that'll do it. And what that lets us do is rewrite this handler. So here I can say authenticated principal mono of user details user. Okay, good. Okay, and we just comment this out. So here I've got a user with the user details of Spring Security user details. I'm going to turn that user details into a name. So I'll say ud.get username. That's this here. We want to map that. Okay, that's it. That's the much simpler code. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Look at that, huh? Much cleaner. I love that. I love that new component model. All right, so now we are, I think we're ready to go. We've got a secure service, my friends. We can spin this up, and I think in order to see it in its glory, we need to, first of all, we may need to define the RSocket port. I knew I forgot something. We need the port. So this thing has got to run on something. So we need to tell Spring Boot to launch it on port 8888 and make it available for people to connect. Once we've done that, we can now go back to our client and connect to it, right, in an authenticated way. So there we go. It's up and running. You can see it here on port 8888. We go back to our greetings client, and we go here, file, open, okay, downloads, client, pom.xml. Open as a project. Cool. So greetings client application. What we need to do is, pretty straightforward. We need to define an RSocket requester, and we need to configure ever so quickly the strategy for both encoding the authentication information and for propagating it. Okay, so let's do the first part here, right? Well, actually, let's cheat a little bit here. Let's draw a picture of what we're trying to do, and then we'll do the code that actually makes it possible. Okay, so application listener, application ready event. So I'm going to create a bean that listens for a ready event in the Spring application context, and when it arrives, we're going to use that as an opportunity to send data across the wire, and we're going to do so using an RSocket requester, which is the client that you would use to call another endpoint, an RSocket endpoint. Okay, we haven't defined that bean yet, so don't worry if you're a little confused. I am purposely waving past that. So we're going to say greetings dot route. We're going to send a call to the greetings endpoint dot metadata, and the metadata is the credentials, right? So what kind of credentials? Well, private final. We want a MIME type, and we need the username and password. So MIME type MIME, okay, MIME type utils dot, and we're going to use well-known MIME type dot, and we want the RSocket authentication, something like that. Yeah, there is dot get string. Okay, there's this private final username password metadata equals. There we are. So we said JLong and PW. Okay. So now we send this here. We say this.credentials. Let's just do credentials. It's easier to remember. This.credentials, this.mime type. The data that we're going to send in is empty. It's just an empty publisher. The data that we expect back, of course, is a stream of greetings responses, which we can't very well do without our greetings response type. So go back to the service and copy and paste that type. So we have it for streaming. Okay. And then we're going to subscribe. We're just going to log the data out as it arrives. So log.info, and of course we need a logger to make that work. Okay. So we say secured response gr.get message. Okay, there we go. Or actually, better yet, just do a toString so you can see everything is intact. So here, in this example, we're making a call across the wire, and we're sending the data in the request itself. But remember, RSocket is a stateful connection protocol. So when the RSocket requester and responder connect, they stay connected. They're going to connect to the very beginning of the application, as we're going to see here pretty shortly right now. And then they stay connected. There's no reason that they have to, if it's one user, one person making all the requests, then there's no reason it has to be a different, there's no reason that they have to re-authenticate every single time. You can do that, right? That's you can send a message per request, as we are here. In that case, if this was an actual web application and I had Josh logged into the system and then I wanted to call a backend service implemented using RSocket, I could then encode that information and send it across the wire using this mechanism. But if we trust everybody, then you can just do that setup once in the RSocket requester itself. So it's up to you. You can do it on connection time or per request. I'm going to do it per request because I assume that's what most of us are going to want. Now, in order for this to work, of course, we need to make sure that the public static void main application stays up when we start it, because otherwise it'll just start and then immediately terminate because there's no blocking process keeping the port open. And we need to define our beans, right? We're not going to get very far without the RSocket requester. And the requester requires a builder, so we say RSocket requester dot builder, and we're going to connect. By the way, that's how you would do that, right? You'd say dot setup metadata, this dot credentials, this dot mime type. We're not going to do that, but that's how you would do it. You connect onto localhost port 8888.block. All right, so that's creating our RSocket bean, the client, if you will. But we need to configure how that client conveys our simple authentication mechanism. There are other kinds of authentication. As I said, there's HTTP basic, which is now deprecated, but still, it compiles. And there's also JOT or JWT based authentication, which I think is probably another video, right? RSocket requester, RSocket strategies customizer, and we're going to use the opportunity here, this callback opportunity, to configure some strategies. So we're going to configure an encoder, in particular the new simple authentication encoder. So that's it, I think, my friends. That ought to do it. That's the thrust of the application. All that remains is to see it work. So here's our service. Here's our client on the left, our service on the right. Cool. Look at that, huh? It says hello J-Long. So as we connect, we're getting back an infinite stream of values from our controller over here on the right. And that information, the name of the person that we're greeting, is informed by the current authenticated user, which is stored in the current request. And we could have used the reactive security context holder, or we can use authenticated principal. Either way, couldn't get much simpler than that. So now we've got this amazing service protocol. We can do service-to-service communication. Our requests are authenticated, multiplexed, reactive, not a lot of code, very easy to understand code. I love this. I love how robust this protocol already has been, and with deep integration in the framework at the Spring framework level, at Spring Boot level, at Spring Security level, having this all just work is really great. Remember, I'm using Spring Boot 2.3. Spring Boot already has auto configuration, or at least a lot of it, for security out of the box, right? So I didn't have to do a lot of stuff that would have otherwise been required to make this work. So you can try this out today. You should try it out today. It's awesome. Um, and go forth and scale, my friends. All right, thanks everybody. I hope you learned something, and as usual, we'll see you next time.